My presentation is on drunk driving laws and traffic fatality rate. I chose this topic because I have a personal relationship to both traffic fatality victims and alcoholics. I also have a passion to make educated voting choices, and I'm very interested to see the effectiveness of laws based on what they are intended to do. This topic is relevant to all of society because one person every 50 minutes dies due to a drunk driving accident. In 2018 alone, there was 10,511 drunk driving deaths. It's important that we learn from the past and see which laws are most effective at reducing traffic fatalities. The sampling method I chose for my topic was simple random sampling. My original sample size was 336, and this was based off various states in various years. I reduced the sample size down to 250 after the simple random sampling. I chose this because I determined the original population to be biased because not every state was included, and I thought that random sampling would best determine the pattern of how the drunk driving laws affect traffic fatality rate. So the variables that were in my data set were JLID, ComCert, state, year, beer tax, MRAL, META, V-miles, unrate, and pairing, and you can see what they correspond to on the slide. So the ones I actually chose for the purpose of this presentation and my project were mandatory jail time, which was indicated with yes or no, mandatory community service, which was also yes or no. These were my two qualitative. And for my three quantitative, I chose beer tax, which was the percent tax on beer, MRAL, which is the traffic fatality rate in deaths per 100,000, and META, which was the minimum drinking age. You can see the variables chosen for my analysis highlighted in gray. So just to introduce my two qualitative variables, you can see bar graphs for community service on the left and for mandatory jail time on the right. So if we compare the orange bar, we can see that 0.296 is much higher than 0.172. So this means that there's a higher frequency for mandatory jail time than mandatory community service in my random sample. So in general, though, no community service and jail time is more frequent for both, as you can see that the blue one is much bigger than each of the orange. I chose these variables because they relate most to the topic of interest on how drunk driving related laws affect traffic related deaths. I want to analyze these variables to determine how beer tax, minimum drinking age, mandatory community service, and mandatory jail time laws in different states relate to the traffic fatality rates. So the two data analysis research questions that I will focus on in this presentation are: one, what is the frequency of states having mandatory jail time and community service for drunk driving offenses? And two, how does mandatory jail time for drunk driving offenses relate to traffic fatality rates? So for my research question one, I created a bar graph for mandatory jail time and community service. You can see no community service in yellow and community service in green. Under the no jail time on the left of this bar graph, you can see that in yellow, no community service is very high at 0.949. So the combination of no community service and no jail time is very frequent in this random sample. You can also see that community service is more frequent when jail time is also mandatory, as you can see by comparing the two green bars on no jail time versus jail time. So my observations for this research question are that mandatory jail time for drunk driving offenses is more frequent than community service. This may be due to harsher punishment for drunk driving offenses by states that struggle with drunk driving. Maybe jail time is easier for the justice system than having a punishment of community service. The combination of no jail time or community service is most frequent because maybe in the 80s it was more common to have less harsh of punishments, and maybe some punishments were just a fine and the license being revoked. Another observation was required community service is more frequent when jail time is also required, and this could be due to community service and jail time being passed together in the same proposition. Maybe in states that struggle with drunk driving, they pass the laws at the same time, which might be why they often occur together. Um, so, for my second research question on how the two qualitative variables of jail time and community service relate to traffic fatality rates, I am first showing some box plots and mean bar plots of jail time and traffic fatality rates. I want to focus on the right hand side where you can see that for the bar on the right under yes, it is much higher for the mean traffic fatality rate than the no. So this might be saying that the traffic fatality rate is higher when there is mandatory jail time. This trend continues when we look at the box plot and mean bar plot for mandatory community service. As you can see, the mean traffic fatality rate is again higher for yes community service as seen in the graph on the right. These are confirmed when we compare the means and standard deviations of traffic fatality rate against mandatory jail time and community service. As you can see, my bolded numbers for both JLID versus MRAL and ComCert versus MRAL, we can see that 2.26 is bigger than 1.9 and 2.25 is also bigger than 1.9. So they both have higher mean fatality rates when there is mandatory jail time or mandatory community service. So I wanted to see how everything relates together, so I created a bar graph for mandatory jail time and for mandatory community service against traffic fatality rates. So you can see that the orange is community service and the blue is no community service. And then on the left of the graph is no jail time and the right is yes jail time. And on our y-axis, we have traffic fatality rate. We can see that no community service and community service don't really make a difference for mandatory jail time, but we can see that mandatory jail time does have a higher traffic fatality rate. It's slightly higher for yes community service and yes mandatory jail time, but it's only a hair off from no community service and yes mandatory jail time. So we're seeing a theme here that for mandatory jail time and mandatory community service that there's higher traffic fatality rates, and for no community service and no jail time that there's lower traffic fatality rates. This is kind of counterintuitive, but I do have some possible explanations for this. So some possible explanations could be that states with more drunk driving related accidents and more dense populations implement stricter laws. And this could account for the higher traffic fatality rates for the yes-yes combination and lower rates for the no-no combination. Because if you think about it, states that struggle with traffic related deaths, or say there's just more urban areas, more freeways, they're going to have higher traffic fatality rates, and maybe that is why they needed to pass the laws in the first place for mandatory jail time and community service. This is just one possible explanation, but further investigation and research into the data and other sources needs to be done in order to make a firm conclusion. In the future, I want to look into the other quantitative variables such as beer tax and minimum drinking age in relation to the traffic fatality rate. I would also love to look into how various years and various laws relate, and maybe even into current day laws. Here are my references for the statistics I used in the photos. And thank you so much for listening to this presentation. Have a great day. Thanks.